of my favorite things to do as a hobby is sourdough baking. Today I'm making 2 rustic loaves, and I always double the recipe because I will have one for our family now, and then I'll freeze one for once we're done with that next one. So we always start out the same. We have our leaven, which we had fed previously, and now we're using it to start our bread. So I will put the recipe that I've specifically used on the screen. I make several adaptations, and adaptations are seasonal. They're based on the temperature of my home. They're based on sometimes my leaven is a little bit more hydrated than other times, meaning it's soupier, and therefore I need a little bit more water in my bread. So those are all of the things that you need to take into account when you are baking sourdough bread. But don't let any of that scare you. The main thing is just to get into it. I started baking sourdough bread is because I started looking at ingredients on labels and realized how much stuff was in all this bread that I was eating. And I had a little bit of extra time at that time in my life and decided I was going to start making fresh bread for my family. All right, so far we've added the leaven and we've added the water. Now I stir it around, and I want to make sure all that leaven and water is mixed together. I don't want any clumpy leaven bits in my water. It just makes it rise a little bit better. It makes everything blend easier when I do this step first. And one thing with your water, I always use a kettle. I heat it to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and I always use filtered water. So that is one thing to note that I do when I bake sourdough. And I also mix my flours. So now I'm putting 1,000 grams of flour. So I've zeroed out my scale, and I do a blend of flours from King Arthur's. I will do about 60% bread flour and then 40% all-purpose flour to make up that 1,000 grams of flour that I use in my recipe. This is just something I've experimented over time, and this works really well for us. Now that I've mixed my flours, I go ahead and add my salt. I use a kosher salt from Morton, and here I'm just gradually put in some salt. I use 25 grams of salt in this particular recipe. And notice it's right on top of the flour. I don't mix the flour with the water before I add the salt. Now I go in and I'm gently stirring everything together. I do this until the dough is relatively wet and mixed together. And then now, after that is done, you'll see me start getting into the dough with my hands. So now I'm getting in there with my hands. It is important to massage this dough, mix it well, make sure there are no dry clumps in your dough here. So one thing that I do that really helps keep the dough off my hands, you'll see that I still get some on there, is that I will, right by the faucet, I will put my hand under the faucet and get it just a little wet, and then get in there and start kneading the dough with my fingers. And then you'll see me reach again and get a little bit more water on my hand and knead the dough. You don't want too much water because you don't want to make your dough too wet, but you want to make sure that it mixes well. Then I go ahead and cover it with a shower cap, and I'm going to set it aside for an hour. Then I come back and I do a set of stretch and folds. So I wet my hand, so I did it a few times, and I stretch it up, pull it over and down. And I will do that all around the bowl. And I will do this several more times. So that was after 1 hour, I did my first stretch and fold there. Now I'll do 3 more sets of stretch and folds, and I try to do these at 30-minute increments. Now, be mindful that if 30 minutes doesn't directly work for your schedule, that's okay. But I probably wouldn't go longer than 45, or if you need to, you can shrink it down to 20 minutes. That is fine. Sourdough is flexible relatively, once you learn how to do it and understand some of the parameters that work within your environment. And now, after my last stretch and fold, I will cover it up and I'm going to let this sit on the counter for about 10 hours. And sometimes I even let it just sit overnight. That's really easy for me to do. Now it's time to shape it. So I am going to flour 2 of my bread bowls. And I'm doing this before church on a Sunday morning. So one, I have a liner in there and one I don't, just so you can see how I manipulate them differently. So I have putting flour in the cloth liner, and then I'm spreading flour in the actual bread bowl with no liner in it. This is really important to line it well, otherwise your dough will stick. My dough does tend to stick just a little bit anyway, so you'll see me work with that later in the video. Now this is my dough. It's risen overnight. I'm going to take it out of my bowl here. I use a bench scraper to kind of get the dough out, and I have a cleaned surface on my countertop that I will work with to shape this dough. Now, once it all comes out of the bowl, I use my best guess to divide this in half. Today I'm doing 2 rustic loaves, but sometimes I will do half as a rustic loaf, and then sometimes I'll do the other half as a focaccia. So I'll show you how I do that in a future video. But here, using my bench scraper, the best that I can, I'm dividing in half. You can use your scale also to see if the pieces that you've divided are equal or not. I don't really care that much, so that's why I just eyeball it. Now I'm going to stretch it all out. So you'll see I kind of pull up the dough a little bit, get some air under there and just stretch it out. I want it thin. I want to get out those air bubbles, and I just want to make sure that I've got kind of equal spread throughout my entire loaf. Once I've spread it out to where I am satisfied, then I will fold it in. I do like a half fold in, half fold, and then I do a roll up. Some people do this differently. It really is just what works for you. And then I roll it into a bowl. You'll see I kind of push and pull. The goal is to get the seam under at the bottom and to get it to be a nice kind of puffy ball at the top that you can easily pick up with your bench scraper and put it in your bread bowl or your bread bowl there. So you'll see I'll do that, and then I'm going to put another shower cap on top. I love these shower caps. Everything that I use to make my sourdough rustic loaves, I have linked in the description. So check those out, whether you are an experienced sourdough baker. If you have other tools that you love to use, put those in the description also so it can help all of us. And here I'm just shaping the second loaf, and I will do the same with the second loaf as I did with the first loaf. Once I shape both of these, I let them sit out on my counter for about 2 to 3 hours so that they have a second rise. And then I put them in my fridge. When you put them in their fridge, it hardens them slightly, so then they're just a little bit easier to score. And I'll show you how to score, how I do a quick score on both of these towards the end of this video. All right, so I'm taking the bread bowls out of the fridge. They were in there for about 2 hours after my 3-hour rise on the countertop. Now, this is the first one that was in the fabric within the banneton. I did one deep score so that the air can escape and it can breathe while baking. And then I did a little bit of a decorative kind of flower on the top. Then you'll see when I do the second one, I did not do a liner on that one. I did that one directly in the banneton basket. And I do need to pull it back a little bit, the dough back with my fingers, otherwise it will stick when I take that one out, whether it's humidity in my home or whatever it might be. Even if you flour it really good, you still might run into this. So that's what I do to get it out of the basket easier. And then I will score this one as well. Now on this loaf, I did a little bit of a different score. I did one score directly vertical and then one horizontal. And then I went in and I made them deeper as I went. And then I did small decorations within each individual triangle. And you'll notice I score on a key tool for sourdough. It's my sling, my silicone slings. So I score it and then I can bring it in to my pan or into my Dutch oven. My Dutch oven has been preheated at 500 and I've taken it out of the oven. I put my sling in, I put it back in the oven. And this is me taking it out of the oven. Here it is. That is after the first bake, which is typically somewhere between 30 and 35 minutes. And you'll see it looks toasty and wonderful. And then I will put back on the lid. I will lower the temperature to 420, 425, and then I put it back in the oven to bake for another 10 to 12 minutes. In 10 to 12 minutes, all of my timings vary kind of based on the first bake, how golden it is, how crusty everything looks. You will learn these as you continue your sourdough journey. Now we've taken it out after its final bake and it's still in the sling. The sling is hot. So make sure using your hot pads that you take the sling out and move it over to your rack and then move it off the sling at that point. Now, after it's cooled for about 2 hours, if you can wait that long, I will cut into it. I use these great knives. I will link it in the description, my sourdough bread knife, and I will just cut off one end. I love the end. It's crispy and just wonderful right when it's still a little bit warm and fresh out of the oven. So here I am cutting that off, and then I make fresh butter. We don't have cows in our backyard. I do buy heavy cream and I make the butter that way. I will link the video on how to make fresh butter also, and I keep it in this great little butter dish. So I'm going to put some fresh butter on there and I am going to enjoy the glorious first bite of still a warm piece of sourdough. And I did bake both bowls, but I only showed you one in this video just for sake of time, but I did follow the same process for baking the other one as well. I really hope this was informative for you and you're able to grab a few things that will help just make your sourdough journey a little bit easier. Don't give up, keep trying. Even in doubt, always bake the loaf. Enjoy the journey.